Good afternoon. My name is Sean Ulmer. I'm Executive Director here at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. I want to thank you for joining me for another edition in our series called Grant Wood in Focus. This is where we look at Grant Wood, works of art or some aspect of his life, and do a small presentation on some aspect thereof. This is a series that we began a couple of years ago. These are recorded and then uploaded onto our YouTube channel. So if you are interested in seeing some other programs, you can certainly find them there, as well as other programs that we do on Zoom. We do this series of quarterly Grant Wood in Focus programs because we do have the world's largest collection of works by Grant Wood, a portion of which are always out on view at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. So if you're in the area, please come on down and take a look. There are several pieces that are on view currently. In addition to our Grant Wood Gallery, we have a number of his pieces on view Inspired by Cedar Rapids, which is an exhibition that's up through the holidays, as well as a couple of his pieces in the Vessel. So do come and check those out if you want to see a little bit more of Grant Wood than we may normally have on view. Today, we're going to be looking at Grant Wood's use of metalwork. Most people know Grant Wood for the creation of American Gothic, the most widely recognized American painting of all time. But before he was a painter, he actually was a metalworker. And this is something he did and continued to do for many years throughout his career. And it's an aspect that a lot of people do not know about him, and thought this would be a nice program to kind of shed a little bit of light on this aspect of his career, something that really was the focus in the beginning part of his career, and then as he became a more successful painter, while it was still a part of his life, it wasn't the focus to the same degree as it was early in his career. So I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, I think you can see that now. So yes, we're going to focus on Grant Wood and his metalwork, and as I mentioned, it is something that he really focused on in his youth. He was actually working in metal and in wood while still in high school, and so I show a very youthful picture of Grant Wood here from those days. He graduates from high school in 1910. And immediately takes the train to Minneapolis to take a summer course at the Handicraft Guild. This is see if I can get the exact title here. It's in Minneapolis, the Handicraft Guild. I'm sure I've got it here somewhere. Pardon me here. Oh, here we go. It is the Handicraft Guild School of Design, Handicraft, and Normal Art. I wanted to get that correct. It was a fairly new school. It really only begun at the very end of the 19th century, and it didn't even move into this building in Minneapolis until 1907. And they had built this. This was a purpose-built building for the Handicraft Guild. And Grant Wood took summer classes here, both in 1910 and then again in 1911. And they were just summer classes. And one of the reasons why he gravitated towards this school was because of this guy, Ernest Batchelder. Ernest Batchelder was a key teacher at the Handicraft School. But he had moved on by the time Grant Wood arrived in 1910. There are sources that say he studied under Batchelder, and that's not possible. In reality, Batchelder had already moved on, I believe, to a school in California where he was to reside the rest of his life. But he was not there in 1910 when Grant Wood came up as a student. But his influence was still very much a part of the Handicraft School. Handicraft Guild. And Batchelder is best known for his tile work, for his ceramic tile work. And you see him here much later in life with a large tile piece. He was inspired by the arts and crafts movement. He really was a proponent of the arts and crafts movement, and that really guided the Handicraft Guild in Minneapolis. The arts and crafts movement of the late 19th, early 20th century was really a movement that had begun in Britain. It was a reaction to the Industrial Revolution and the quality of products being created by machines was just not as high as the quality of objects that were being created by hand. And so the arts and crafts movement really emphasized handmade artwork, handmade products, and it also emphasized the fact that art should be a part of everyday life, that everything should be artistic. So, maybe not if you're working in the factory, but when you come home, your fireplace should be surrounded with beautiful tile work. The wood in your house should be beautifully carved. Your candlestick holders should be handcrafted metal pieces. Every aspect of life around you should be artistically inspired. And that was very much a part of the arts and crafts movement. And that was the pervasive feeling at the handicraft school. And while Batchelder was primarily a ceramic artist, a ceramicist, he did also do metalwork. And here are a couple of examples of the metalwork that are attributed to him. One of the interesting things about metalwork is metalwork in general is oftentimes not signed. And so it is oftentimes ascribed or attributed to, and also sometimes multiple people have a hand in its creation, as we'll see that is to be the case with Grant Wood as well. Here, Grant Wood at this time, really adopting the pose of an artist. Here, he's still a very young man. He's just out of high school. It's the first summer after high school. And he comes back after summer in the fall and teaches in a one-room schoolhouse called Rosedale, which is about 3 miles west of Cedar Rapids. And he teaches there, and here he is as the teacher of the Rosedale class. And this is how he's actually making a living. He's teaching, gets a teaching certificate. He's teaching at this one-room schoolhouse for the year. And then the following summer, he goes back to the Handicraft Guild in Minneapolis to take more classes, then comes back to work. One of the earliest works that he creates is with a friend of his from Cedar Rapids, Kate Loomis, around 1912. So we're really talking about only, sometime 1.5 to 2 years after he's graduated from high school. Did a series of small metal pieces. This is one, a calendar stand, with Kate Loomis. You can see in the image that they've actually inscribed it Loom Wood, which is was the name of their collaboration, if you will. This, amongst other works, are submitted to an exhibition in Chicago, and that proves to be pivotal for Grant Wood, because it's from that exhibition that someone from the Kalo shop in just outside Chicago reaches out to Grant Wood, and he is then employed by the Kalo shop outside Chicago in the following year. So he leaves in 1913 Cedar Rapids to join the Kalo Arts and Crafts Community House in a suburb of Chicago, Park Ridge, and it's known for its arts and crafts, jewelry, and metalwork. So it's kind of like the perfect job for him. And so he works there. The shop moves in 1914 away from Park Ridge, but it's at that time that Grant Wood and a fellow Kalo shop member, Christopher Haga, stay in Park Ridge and create their own company called the Lund Crafts Shop. named for the Norse god. And it's from the Valand craft shop, which they began in 1914, that a piece such as this comes. So this is a necklace that the Grant Wood and probably Christopher Haga with him created. It is a piece in our collection, and really kind of magnificent piece. It's very much arts and crafts with a little bit of Art Nouveau styling in it as well. Large mother of pearl surrounded by copper work. And if you look at jewelry from the Kalo shop at the same time, you can see where the inspiration came from. He's very much taking what he learned at the Kalo shop and applying it himself. So here are just two undated examples from the Kalo shop where he had been working that very much inspired the piece that we have in our collection. But much more typical work from the Valand craft shop is something like this. This hammered bowl with silver over copper, which have been probably made, the two of them together, Wood and Haga together, working on this piece is another piece that's in our collection. In fact, this piece is currently on view in our vessel exhibition, so you can see it firsthand. But I have some incoming photographs that I can share with you here. You can see that you can see the hammering, and you can see some of that copper coming through. Here a little bit closer. But there was also these very higher end pieces like you see here, this wonderful picture that you can see engraved with initials on it. The handle, should you be able to see it in person, it's not currently on view, but the handle is still very much that hammered texture that we saw in the bowl previously, but the actual body of the picture is much smoother, much more finished. Have a larger image of it here, and here the stamping on the bottom of it. So this is hand wrought at Valand shop. This is one of those odd sort of things that a little bit more research needs to be done on this phase of Grant Wood's career, because the Valand shop existed not only under Grant Wood and Christopher Haga, but also under other workers. And so by that I mean that the Valand shop that Grant Wood and Christopher Haga opened closes after about 18 months. There really just isn't an appetite for high-end silver pieces as America is entering World War I. And so when they opened it in 1914, it closes in January of 1916. So really only about 18 months it was in business. Grant Wood returns to Cedar Rapids and forges a career there. However, friends of his from the Kalo shop, friends of his later opened their own shop, and they also call it Valand. They call it Valand shop. This is B.B. Anderson and Daniel Peterson are the two people who opened this shop. They opened it in 1919, and it runs until about 1926. And so more work needs to be done on the signatures, on these stamps on the bottom. How do we differentiate the work that Grant Wood and Christopher Haga did from the work that B.B. Anderson and Daniel Peterson did? And so more work needs to be done because it is important to differentiate the work that Grant Wood is actually doing here. So this is how our picture is stamped. And here I wanted to share with you another wonderful piece, somewhat similar to ours, that's at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts. And I'm just a second here. I'm going to switch over to a little bit better view here. It makes it a little bit larger. My apologies for not switching over to slideshow format earlier. But this is the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, and this is attributed to both Grant Wood and Christopher Haga, and it's part of a larger set that you see here that they own. Really, really quite fine and very much related to our piece. And here, a serving spoon that's from the Rhode Island School of Design Museum. Also, you can see you get a wonderful sense of that little bit of that wonderful textured, hammered, probably copper with silver overlay. As I mentioned, Grant Wood comes back to Cedar Rapids, and a little disappointed that his company didn't make it. Timing was really bad, I think, for him because we were entering the First World War, and luxury goods were just not moving. So so he comes back, and we have a number of works that he continues to explore in metalwork, and all fairly loosely dated, somewhat unclear dating. But here's one. This is a hanging lampshade with the peacock motif. This is just sort of a working image that we have internally. But you can see it's a combination of wood and metal. Here, our former preparator, Judy Frauenholz, is cleaning it or conserving it in anticipation for our 2005 exhibition on Grant Wood, our major retrospective of Grant Wood, which is, as you see here, this is how it was installed in 2005. And so you can see it illuminated here, and it's just a wonderful silhouette of these peacocks, really kind of a cut out metal form over a colored glass. Again, very much in the arts and crafts tradition. Very much, you can see sort of that handmade quality of it in this image. And then we have had it on view more recently in this exhibition in 2021. We had it on view again. You can see the necklace down below and a few other pieces of metal, some of which we'll be discussing here in a moment. Also, around this time, it's loosely dated, in 1920, he and his best friend Marvin Cohn head off to Paris, and they spend the summer in Paris. Marvin Cohn had been abroad in World War I. And vowed to go back. He comes back in 1919, and then in 1920, he does get to go back, and he brings his good friend Grant Wood with him. Grant Wood had been in World War I as well, but he had been stationed in Washington, D.C., painting camouflage. And so he did not go abroad. This was Grant Wood's first trip abroad, and Marvin Cohn's second. And they decide that they're going to stay in Paris for the summer of 1920, and they go out and they paint on these small 13 by 15 inch composition boards all around the city, sometimes together, sometimes separately. Marvin Cohn has a wonderful diary that sort of talks about the different places that they went and where they were painting and stuff. But it was a somewhat rainy summer, so there was a number of times where they were working indoors, working in where they were staying in their rooms, and this is probably the product of that. So in Marvin Cohn's diary, he talks about Grant Wood drawing a profile of him for a bas relief, a low relief, and so this is a small 3 by 3 inch relief, bronze relief of Marvin Cohn by Grant Wood. You can see it says Paris 1920 in the upper left-hand corner. And it was a wonderful little bronze work. On the back, it is stamped C. Valassoire, and that was a bronze maker the Valaswani, excuse me, I said Valaswani. This was Claude Valaswani. He opened up, he had come to France from Italy with his father. He and his brother did. They were all in bronze works. And Claude studies first at Habard in France, and then opens up his own foundry in Châtillon in 1899, moves his foundry to Paris in 1905, where he sets up shop at 74 Rue de Plante in Paris, and he becomes a caster for a number of artists, including Renoir, Picasso, Matisse, and Gauguin, for example. And he is a place that you go if you are an artist and you want something cast. And so Grant Wood created a drawing of Marvin Cohn, as you see here, and used that drawing to craft a plaster. And then that plaster was made into a mold, and then they used a lost wax process. The cire perdue, I'm going to go back here. That's what you see here. This is cire, and that says perdue. See Valaswani's in here. And so we used this drawing to create a plaster that was then made into a bronze. And so here you see the drawing next to the bronze, and here a little bit larger version of it, which I think gives you a good sense of how faithfully that was, how Grant Wood translated his drawing to a plaster, and then how that plaster was then cast in this small run edition. It would have been probably an edition of 10 or less. That was very, very common for Valaswani to work in editions of about 10. So not huge editions, but this one is not numbered, so we don't know for sure how large the edition is. But it was Grant Wood continuing to explore his interest in metalwork in a completely different direction. It's not in silver goods. It's not in lampshades. It's really his own interest in sort of, here I did this drawing. Let's see how this looks when we cast it into bronze. He did the same from around the time period when he comes back of Charles B. Keeler, who was a fellow artist of his. And here you see another bronze, a little bit larger, about 5 by 5 inches in this case, of Charles B. Keeler. So don't know, this one's not marked, so don't know when and where it was cast, but it looks like it dates from about the same time. And then, of course, from the middle part of the decade, we have this wonderful casting here, a self-portrait, somewhat humorous self-portrait of Grant Wood. This is something that was cast in brass in a set number. This particular self-portrait was also then reproduced much later. So long after Grant Wood died, an original was used to create a mold, and so there are subsequent later castings of the work. This one comes to us from the Turner family, who gave us many of our Grant Wood pieces. This one is firmly established as being one of the ones that Grant Wood created during his lifetime. So that's why I'm showing you this one. But the ones that were created more recently are very faithful copies of this as well, but just, there are more out there than the ones that Grant Wood cast himself. Around the same time, Grant Wood is moving into his studio. So the Turners, who had bought the Douglas mansion, were converting it into a funeral home. That was their business, and they hired Grant Wood, who knew the younger Turner. John B. Turner was the father, and David Turner was the son. David knew Grant Wood, and they employed him to help convert the mansion into a funeral home. And in the process, the hayloft in the carriage house was being unused, and so they offered the hayloft to Grant Wood as a studio. And he starts using it as a studio in late 1924. And very quickly realizes that with a few modifications, the studio can be a great place for him, not just to work, but also to live. And so he makes changes to the hayloft, and makes it a livable space. And part of that, he does create a number of wrought iron pieces that are utilized in the studio. And so here I have a whole series of these that have come down to us. Here a hook, here another hook. You can see these are wrought iron. You get a real sense of the hammered and twisting form, still very much inspired by the arts and crafts tradition. Here a wonderful handle, very simple, with this kind of vegetal form on both ends. This wonderful leaf form on both ends. And here actually a handle, as you can see, it's actually kind of a door handle, again with a leaf form terminus on it. Now at this point, I'm not sure if Grant Wood is forging this work himself, or if he's designing it and somebody else is forging. We have documents that George Keeler, Charles B. Keeler's brother, George Keeler, was a good wrought iron worker, and that Grant Wood did utilize him in all likelihood for the creation of the corncob chandelier, which we'll talk about in a minute, and the gates, the iron gates that came from the Van Vechten Schaefer home, which we'll also talk about in a minute. So it's entirely possible that at this point, Grant Wood is designing and George Keeler is forging the work. So not a different, a very similar sort of arrangement to, I think, what he did with Christopher Haga in Valon shop, and possibly the arrangement that he and Kate Loomis had. With metalwork, oftentimes many hands are involved. And Grant Wood, even if he did not forge this himself, was certainly probably the designer of the piece. And as long as we're talking about the studio, we cannot forget this wonderful door to 5 Turner Alley. It's in itself is not metal, but the dial that you see here, early version of an answering machine, if you will, is metalwork, and you can see it also has this wonderful lines about it, and it feels very sort of biomorphic and vegetal. I mean, there's the crossbars, which allow him to move this dial around to let people know before they even knock on the door whether he's in town or whether he's taking a bath or whether he's having a party, those sorts of things. So metalwork is still very much going on. So, he graduates, in 1910. He's already doing wood and metal work there. Here we're talking about 1924, a full, decade and a half later. And he's still very much interested in metalwork and woodworking in his career. Here a shot from inside the Grant Wood studio. This is a punchwork piece. This is a punchwork piece that kind of covers up a radiator that was installed. And you can see it is this wonderful stylized floriform here, kind of a flower with two, one leaf on each side of the flower form. Just a simple kind of punch work, very stylized, very decorative. Grant Wood was always interested in the decorative. Beautiful piece of metalwork, a series of panels here in the studio. And he uses this same sort of simplified floriform later in his artwork. So here, calendulas from 2829, and you can see the background of calendulas is again another stylized floriform in roundels. very similar to the metalwork. So patterns and imagery that he's interested in paintings end up in metal, and in metal end up in paintings. So there's this great sort of cross current in his work, where you see these images recur. But of course, at the same time, he's also being very playful with metalwork. I could hardly not include Lilies of the Alley. This is a series of flower pot creations of these sort of floriforms, but made with found objects. As opposed to fabricated objects. I mean, fabricated by somebody at some time, but these are really found objects that kind of he repositions and reconstructs into sort of into a flower pot of sorts. And it is our understanding that he gave these sometimes as hostess gifts and other gifts around. There are 4 of these that in existence, to my knowledge. We own 2 of them, and this is one of them. The larger of the 2, 12 by 12 inches, and this is a smaller one. Not such a great image of it, but this is a smaller one. Both of these are on view in our Grant Wood Gallery. And here are the other 2, which are owned by the Dubuque Museum of Art. And you can see they're all of the same type, made up of found objects, purportedly objects that he found in the alley outside of his studio, which is why they're called Lilies of the Alley. Because they really sort of represent things that he found, on the ground, and repurposed into these wonderful sort of assemblages that incorporate metalwork. From around the same time, again, not firmly dated, but somewhere in the 20s, we feel is this pair of andirons, which are currently kind of painted gold, but they are actually wrought iron. Really beautiful pieces here, elements here that kind of serve as andirons, but end in this wonderful little finial on both sides. This wonderful little see-through, transparent finial that allows you to look behind into the fireplace. Really, really wonderful work. Again, at this point, we don't know that he is forging it himself, but certainly designing it, and may have used his friend George Keeler to actually do the forging of the work. And we know he worked with George Keeler on the corncob chandelier. This was commissioned along with paintings for the Hotel Montrose. Actually, there were 3 hotels in Iowa. Where Grant Wood was asked to create a kind of corn room, which was kind of a dining room or a multi-purpose room, but more often a dining room. And the people sitting there would be surrounded by these murals of cornfields, and hanging from the ceiling would be these wonderful corncob chandeliers. And this one is one that we had fully restored not too long ago in anticipation of the 2005 exhibition. And this is something that, records indicate that he designed and had help from George Keeler in forging it. Here, a little bit closer view of it. And the one that we have comes from the Hotel Montrose, which was, like I said, one of the 3 hotels in Iowa. They were all owned by the same person. But the one in Cedar Rapids was called the Hotel Montrose. And you can see here, you can see a view of the corn room, and you can see some corncob chandeliers hanging in this adjacent photo as well. And here a not so great photograph of it, where you can see the corncob chandelier here against some of Grant Wood's large mural work, which made you feel like you were sitting in the middle of a cornfield in here, and then this wonderful border that ran around the top. Also from a hotel, but a different hotel, the Roosevelt Hotel from 1927, is a railing. thought to be designed by Grant Wood. There are two sections of it that survive. One section is here in the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. The other one is at the Figge Museum in the Quad Cities. Not professional photographs, but the kind of as it came in. You can see there are vertical elements, but then the screening itself is these wonderful curvilinear forms ending in flowers, and you can see these wonderful little leaf like forms here on this, very similar to the leaf-like forms that one finds on the corncob chandelier. Here a little bit more detail. So the plant springing from here with these wonderful leaves, ending in these great multi-petaled flower forms. And here an archival photo, kind of grainy one that was taken from an architecture magazine and of the following year, where it spotlighted several different hotels, and the Roosevelt Hotel was one of those. And here a photograph of one portion of the railing in, again, the dining room of the Hotel Roosevelt. And you can see the railing as it was originally placed in there. Grant Wood also did a pair of gates that you see here. These were also done in collaboration with George Keeler. These gates came to us in 2001 and have been fairly recently conserved. Here a little bit closer view. These gates actually were commissioned. They came from the Van Vechten Schaefer home here in Cedar Rapids, and they separated kind of the main house from a garden room. And so they were, really used as you see here with the family. There was a couple steps down, but you can see the gates actually attached as they originally were in the home here. And so he continues, throughout the 20s, working in metalwork and doing commissions, taking commissions. He did many such projects for homes in Cedar Rapids. The andirons were a commission, for example. These gates were a commission. And here a nice little detail of them. You can see again, there are elements that are missing. These leaf forms are missing from this section here. Here the squiggly vertical is a little off center. But you can see again, it's the same wonderful curvilinear forms here that are still very much vegetally inspired. Here another detail. And here, leading up to, there's another commission. Here, a commission for really a fireplace screen. So kind of back, remember the andirons and the gates here. The decorative qualities, the curvilinear forms, the floriforms are even more intensified. This is from the late 20s, about 1929, 1930, somewhere in that area. You see these wonderful forms here ending in leaf forms. There's some floriforms here, and then you've got this kind of bird-like form here at the top of both sides. And this, like the gates and the andirons and others, are all come from our own collection, not currently on view, but has been on view. And so this is kind of how it would function. Here, with the painting that Grant Wood did over mantle decoration, which would have been above a mantle, a fireplace mantle. And so you kind of, not that these two went together, they were never together, but this is how they functioned. Over mantle would be above a fireplace mantle, so a little bit higher viewpoint, and then the fire screen ornament would be in front of the fireplace itself. So kind of how these two pieces would function, although they were not ever really sort of designed to be together. They come from somewhat different moments in time as well. And an undated work here, a wrought iron candle stand lamp from the 1920s. We don't have a specific date for it, but this is a more recent acquisition. We purchased this at auction in 2012, and it comes from a Cedar Rapids family. And thus it has a good provenance, has been it's very much in fitting with the kinds of works that I've been discussing here so far. You can see that there's a wonderful sense of the decorative qualities in the piece, and you can see some fluoroforms, some just curling elements that you see in something like the fire screen ornament, and still being functional. I mean, it has been wired at one point it was wired for electrical light stand as a kind of lamp stand, but I'm not sure if that was what it was originally, how it was originally intended or not. But we've had this on view from time to time in various exhibitions. Really is a wonderful additional example from the 1920s of the kind of work that he was doing throughout that time. But when his painting career, which he's been doing at the same time throughout the 20s, actually the late teens through the 20s, when his painting career takes off, after he completes the Veterans Memorial Building stained glass commission, and that's installed in 28. He goes to Munich to oversee the creation of that window. He sees Northern Renaissance painting, which is a kind of revelation for him. He changes his painting style from Impressionism to this new style, we call this mature style, and comes back and paints a Woman with Plants, a portrait of his mother in 1929, and in 1930 he paints American Gothic. And has his American Gothic moment, is in great demand, and so really focuses on this new painting style. He is also teaching at the University of Iowa and focuses on his teaching career, and does very little really after this point when it comes to metalwork. It really is something that he begins his career and runs with for about 2 decades, from 1910 to 1930. And it is, many elements in the metalwork find their way into his painting. A lot of the interests he have in metalwork, with the interest in the decorative, the interest in the vegetal forms and so forth, do find their way very much into his painted work. But he does very little that we know of, very little metalwork after 1930. And so it really is something that speaks to a particular moment in his career. Now, he only lives another 12 years. He dies in 1942, so it's difficult to say whether he would have returned to metalwork or gone back into metalwork, had he had a chance to live a little bit longer. But as far as extant material, it really was his entree into the art world, and something that really helped pay the bills, especially through the 1920s until his painting career took off, and his paintings could pay the bills, and his new painting style was very time consuming. So he actually had less time between his new painting style and his teaching schedule, and his service in the Iowa WPA. All took time away from any time he might have had to dedicate towards his metalwork. So that's a little overview of Grant Wood's metalwork. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. It's kind of a very diverse body of work, And but it gives you a sense of how he really explored the very big world of metalwork, and how it really was important to his growth as an artist, and really led him in something he did all the way up until his painting career took off. So, any questions? Just please feel free to unmute yourself and see if I can answer.
I have a quick question. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay. Um, did he do any metal works for well, what is now Bruce Moore for the Douglases or anybody?
He did plaster work for the Douglases. He did,
Plasterwork.
he did the
Okay.
sleeping porch, and so it's wonderful. They've recently conserved that. It's terrific. But you'll see a lot of the same style. Yeah, you should be able to see it on their website. So I recommend you go to the Bruce Moore website. But if you look at it, it's plaster work, but it has these wonderful tendrils that terminate in floriforms. Now, it is populated with birds and so forth like that too. But it's really it's a sleeping porch. Has a real garden feel about it. It does have a lot of interesting shapes and forms that are very similar to his metalwork. So it's a very good question because it's very much related, and it's happening at the same time. Good question. Well, if there are no other questions, I thank you for joining me today. This will be posted on our YouTube channel shortly. So if you are interested in going back and seeing any of these images again, please, you'll be able to find it in a few days when we get it loaded. And we will have another Grant Wood in Focus in 3 months, in March. And our curator, Julia Jessen, will be leading that one. And it will focus on another aspect or a different aspect of Grant Wood's life and career. So in the meantime, please come on down to the museum, check out the Grant Wood works that we have on view. You can see Lilies of the Alley. You can see his bowl, his silver bowl on view currently. Plus, as I mentioned at the top, we have a number of works on view in Inspired by Cedar Rapids that are by Grant Wood because he was very inspired by Cedar Rapids, and that are not always out all the time. So do come on down and check out a little more Grant Wood than you might normally get a chance to see. As I said, Inspired by Cedar Rapids is open until mid-January. And then the vessel closes in the spring and will be replaced by a different show. So come on down and take a look at our Grant Woods that are on view. So thank you for joining me, and hope you have a great rest of your day.